way to...
Okay, so what he's saying is that Dr. Jordan Peterson seemed to only favor Christianity uh, and disregard other disciplines, but I don't think so. Or am I getting him wrong? Uh, I think he's mistaken in terms of Jordan Peterson's position.
find meaning and value in life. And I see his...
What's his warm at the core? What is like? So we're talking about a little bit of a higher level of discovering meaning.
Yeah.
What's his? What does he make of death?
Oh, I don't know. And this is where it would be nice to have him here. He has, from a distance, criticized our work as misguided. Having said that, though, when we were together, he said something along the lines that there is no theoretical body of work in academic psychology right now for which there is more empirical evidence. And so I appreciated that. He's a great researcher. He's a good clinician. The other thing that we will agree to disagree about rather vociferously is ultimately political slash economic. So I remember being at dinner with him, telling him that the next book that I wanted to write was going to be called Why Left and Right Are Both Beside the Point. And my argument was going to be, and it is going to be, that both liberal and conservative political philosophy are each intellectually and morally bankrupt because they're both framed in terms of assumptions about human nature that are demonstrably false.
So he's talking. His position is really critical to both sides. So he's not being political to liberal and conservatives. This criticism or disagreement with Jordan Peterson, as written in the title, is not about politics. It's about the truth, getting into the truth, and that is, in my opinion, super valuable.
And Jordan didn't mind me knocking liberal political philosophy on those grounds. That would basically be like Steven Pinker's blank slate.
Mm-hmm.
But he took issue when I pointed out that actually it's conservative political philosophy, which starts with John Locke's assumption that in a state of nature, there are no societies, just autonomous individuals who are striving for survival. That's one of the most obviously, patently wrong assertions in the history of intellectual thought. And Locke uses that to justify his claims about the individual right to acquire unlimited amounts of property, which is ultimately the justification for neoliberal economics. And
So this is where things started to get contentious in my mind, because first of all, I have watched this clip in entirety. I just but from this at this point in time, I just want to tell you to prepare for. Uh, there are going to be issues about whether or not it is okay for you to get as much riches as possible, and there's an issue of crime, issue of evil, and there's going to be issues, and of course the Gini ratio. Yeah.
Can you linger on that a little bit?
Sure.
What's the? Can you describe his philosophy again as view of the world and,
Sure.
and what neoliberal economics is?
Yeah, let me translate it in English. So basically, all these days, anybody who says I'm a conservative free market type, you're following John Locke and Adam Smith, whether you're aware of it or not. So here's John Locke, who, by the way, all of these guys are great. So for me to appear to criticize any...
Yeah, the like when I study economics in high school, uh, the textbook is referring to John Locke and Adam Smith.
Of these folks, it is with the highest regard. And also, we need to understand, in my estimation, how important their ideas are. Locke is working in a time where all rule was top down by divine right. And he's trying desperately to come up with a philosophical justification to shift power and autonomy to individuals. And he starts in his second treatise on government, 1690 or so. He says, okay, let's start with a state of nature. And he's like, in a state of nature, there's no societies, there's just individuals. And in a perfect universe, there wouldn't be any societies. There would just be individuals who, by the law of nature, have a right to survive. And in the service of survival, they have the right to acquire and preserve the fruits of their own labor. But his point is, and it's actually a good one, he's following Hobbes here. He's like, well, the problem with that is that people are assholes. And if they would let each other alone, then we would still be living in a state of nature, everybody just doing what they did to get by each day. But it's a whole lot easier, if I see like an apple tree a mile away, well, I can go over and pick an apple. But if you're 10 meters away with an apple in your hand, it's a lot easier if I pick up a rock and crack your head and take the apple. Mm-hmm. And his point was that the problem is that people can't be counted on to behave. They will take each other's property. Moreover, he argued, if someone takes your property, you have the right to retribution in proportion to the degree of the magnitude of the transgression. English translation: if I take your apple, you have the right to take an apple back. Mm-hmm. You don't have the right to kill my firstborn. Mm-hmm. But people being people, they're apt to escalate retaliatory behavior, thus creating what Locke called a state of war. So he said, in order to avoid a state of war, people reluctantly give up their freedom in exchange for security. They agree to obey the law, and that the sole function of government is to keep domestic tranquility and to ward off foreign invasion in order to protect our right to property. All right, so now here's the property thing. Uh-huh. All right, so Locke says, if you look in the Bible and in nature, there is no private property. But Locke says, well, surely if there's anything that you own, it's your body. And surely you have a right by nature to stay alive. And then by extension, anything that you do where you exert effort or labor, that becomes your private property. So back to the apple tree. If I walk over to an apple tree, that's everybody's apples.
Did you guys follow that? So up until now, he's talking about his perception of John Locke's point of view of he's stating that there's something wrong with John Locke's point of view of oh my god. Okay, let me explain without context. Okay, so John Locke says that that there could be a state of war in humanity due to our nature to not be peaceful or to not be ethical towards each other, and therefore the government is needed to maintain that peaceful state. He talks about how human beings are individuals, and Sheldon talk about John Locke's perception that human beings are inherently individuals, and he thinks that this is wrong, and he will explain it later. So basically, John Locke is saying that because there are no such thing, so as a group or as a community, as a society, at the very core of it is at the very core of it are individuals. So what matters are the individuals. The point of view of his philosophy are individuals, and he will explain, and Sheldon will explains his counter argument to this. Am I doing this right? Maybe I'm not really that accurate as well. Sorry.
Locke said, you're entitled to have as much money as you're able to garner, right? Then he says, well, the reality is that some people are more, the word that he used was industrious. He said some people are more industrious than others. All right, today we would say smarter, less lazy, more ambitious. He just said that's natural. It's also true. Therefore,
So I have watched some of the Jordan Peterson's videos, and I've watched some videos that use the word industrious. So if it were me, I would use the word industrious in terms of the person is like very business minded, like industrious people are the people who scale things up. They are very they are strongly determined. They have strong determination, and they are persistent in their ventures to their products and services, to make products and services. So they're very productive. So I'm a bit skeptical of his definition of industriousness, in a way that he might be right, that it is the definition that other people use. But in terms of John Locke's point of view, I think the meaning of industriousness is more like being have a strong ability to scale things up instead of smart. So, yeah.
he argued, over time, some people are going to have a whole lot of property and other people not much at all. Inequality for Locke is natural and beneficial for everyone. His argument was that, the rising tide lifts all boats, and that the truly creative and innovative are entitled to relatively unlimited worth because we're all better off as a result. So
this idea that intellectual property is natural is I disagree as well. If you say it is natural, absolutely not. People are not, like, for example, if you copy a book, you lend a book, that is natural, but that's a violation of intellectual property. So it is definitely not natural. But is it a good idea or not? Well, maybe it's for current situation where people don't appreciate the authors, like and the government enforces intellectual property. What other options do you have? Do you have any better options? So actually, in relative to the current situation, intellectual people just don't care that much. So we need intellectual. I guess not. I guess intellectual property is very relevant for that purpose.
point very simply is that, well, that's based, and then you have Adam Smith, in the next century with the invisible hand, where Adam Smith says everyone pursuing their own selfish, that's not necessarily pejorative, if everyone pursues their own selfish interests, we will all be better off as a result.
And what do you think is the flaw in that way of thinking?
Well, there's two flaws. One is that one flaw is, first of all, that it is based on an erroneous assumption to begin with, which is that there never was a time in human history when we were an asocial species.
So this is what he's saying. He disagreed with John Locke, and he stated that it is already proven. It is that nowadays in the modern time we know that John Locke is wrong, that there that we are not social beings. We are selfish. No. We are basically just individuals. Was that really what John Locke is saying? Because let's continue then, and I'll talk about
Since you don't feel like that there's this emphasis of individual autonomy is a flawed premise. Like there's something fundamentally deeply interconnected between us.
I do. I think that Plato and Socrates, in the Crito, were closer to the truth when they started with the assumption that we were interdependent, and they derived individual autonomy as a manifestation.
So, was John Locke really saying that we are not interdependent to each other? Because when he talked about how we could get into a warring state, a state of war, that's in itself is an element of interdependence. That is the reason. That is one of the reason why we are interdependent. Like just the way he described, it merely just by merely just listening to his description, that is by definition an interdependence. So if he thinks that John Locke believed that, and he said that John Locke didn't believe in interdependence of individuals, then that was an explanation for interdependence of individual. That is my opinion.
Of a functional social system.
That's fascinating.
So when Margaret Thatcher, you're too young, in the 1980s, she said, societies? There's no such thing as societies. There's just individuals pursuing their self-interest. So
okay, so that was Margaret Thatcher's statement, but was it John Locke's? Was it an accurate depiction of John Locke and Adam Smith, though? So I'm just saying, don't be so quick to judge.
So that's one point where I would take issue respectfully with John Locke. Point number two is when Locke says in 1690, well, England's filled up. So if you want some land, just go to America. It's empty. Or maybe there's a few savages there. Just kill them. So, and Melville does the same thing in Moby Dick, where he thinks about, will there ever come a time where we run out of whales? Mm-hmm. And he says no, but we have run out of whales. And so Locke was right maybe in 1690 that the world was large and had infinite resources. He's certainly wrong today, in my opinion. Also wrong is the claim that the unlimited pursuit of personal wealth does not harm those around us. There is no doubt that radical inequality is tragic psychological.
So, well, he said Adam Smith's statement is wrong, because if you pursue wealth in an egoistical manner, even, that would be good for a society. So that's what he's saying. So that is yeah, I think so too. I think so. So if you just pursue wealth without any limitation or whatsoever, I'm not saying you should put a cap on your wealth. I'm saying you know Gini ratio, right? So if you become very very rich, there's going to be a problem. So that's in my opinion is true.
Logically and physically. It's poverty is not that terrible. It's easy for me to say because I have a place to stay and something to eat. But as long as you're not starving and have a place to be, poverty's not as challenging as having the impoverished in close proximity to those who are obscenely wealthy.
So it's not any absolute measure of your well.
So there has been a research to this that if in a community the level of wealth, the level of income is similar, there are not much bad things that people would do, less crime. People would do less crime, but if people in the same region have a lot of disparities in income, like a lot of there are very rich people and there are very poor people, it says that is a high Gini ratio, and that would you could reliably predict that that place has a lot of crime happening.
Being is the inequality of that well-being.
That's
is the
quite right.
fundamentally painful. So maybe just to linger on the Jordan Peterson thing in terms of your
So now this is where I would like to invite you to think about this issue, right? Because I personally think we should be able to become rich, okay? Like we get a lot of wealth, and I think one of the things that lifted the whole world's rate of wealth is that industriousness. So people created a lot of goods and services. People want to become rich, and they make it cheaper, better for everybody. They make cheap, easier to acquire food, easier to acquire housing, all of these technologies. I think that is all of those are thanks to industriousness, thanks to people's ambition, people's the society's willingness to allow people to become rich. Okay. In the same time, you can't deny the Gini ratio. So I mean, people have made a lot of simplistic solutions, such as communists, our well-known communism, like countries such as I don't want to mention that, but you guys know, right? So the government controls the price of goods and services. Government put caps on how rich people could be. Government took away assets or properties from people's possession in order to give it to some other people, including their own officials. And I think uh, uh, from the point of view of human intellectual, we could prevent this from happening by challenging this socialism idea that it is not a good idea for you to become very very rich beyond limit. I think we should reject that in order to prevent things such as evil overly controlling communistic ideology countries to reemerge. And they're still here though. Some countries are still here, but yeah, I think we should learn from history and still until now should allow people to become as rich as possible. But uh, let's continue then. I've been talking for too long.
disagreement in his worldview. So he went through quite a bit. There's been quite a bit of fire, right, in his defense or maybe his opposition of the idea of equality of outcomes. So looking at the inequality that's in our world, looking at certain groups
Yeah.
measurably having an outcome that's different than other groups, and then drawing conclusions about fundamental unfairness, injustice, inequality in the system. So like systematic racism,
Yeah.
systematic sexism, systematic anything else that creates inequality. And he's been kind of saying pretty simple things to say that the system for the most part is not broken or flawed.
Yeah.
That the inequality is part the inequality.
Okay, inequality is a problem, definitely. Uh, but I'm not saying as well that there being in current business practices everything is already fair. I'm not saying that as well. I'm sure there are a lot of underpaid employees. I'm sure there are a lot of underpaid experts, underpaid goods and services. Definitely, there are. So when I said people should be allowed to become as rich as possible, of course you have to prioritize justice, and maybe those injustices are the real problem here. It is not really about letting people to become rich, but people want justice though, and people felt that when people felt those injustice, and that became the atmosphere of the community, that those violated sense of justice will lead to more injustice. So perpetrated by the poor people themselves. So this, I mean, the solution must be not more injustice. And I think not letting, oh my god, yeah, that's a scam SMS. Okay, and the solution is not more injustice. Not letting people to become rich is injustice. So that is not. I I will listen more.
Quality of outcomes is part of our world. What we should strive for is the equality of opportunity.
Yeah. And I do not dispute that as an abstraction. But again, to back up for a second, I do take issue with Jordan's fervent devotion to the free market and his cavalier dismissal of Marxist ideas, which he has, in my estimation, mischaracterized in his public depictions.
Let's get into it. So he just seems to really not like socialism, Marxism, communism.
Yeah.
Historically speaking, sort of. I mean, how would I characterize it? I'm not exactly sure. I don't want to. Again, he'll eventually be here to defend himself. John Locke, unfortunately, not here to defend
exactly.
himself. But what's your sense about Marxism and the way Jordan talks about?
Quick point out. So what's the host doing this? Lex doing this is amazing, and like he's giving people he acknowledges that the people whose arguments are being attacked are not here. So yeah, that is very important to point out. Thank you.
The way you think about it from the economics, from the philosophical perspective.
Yeah, well, if we were all here together, I'd say we need to start with Marx's economic and philosophical manuscripts of 1844, before Marx became more of a polemicist. And I would argue that Marx's political philosophy, he's a crappy economist, I don't dispute that. But his arguments about human nature, his arguments about the inevitably catastrophic psychological and environmental and economic effects of capitalism, I would argue every one of those has proven quite right. Marx maybe did not have the answer, but he saw in the 18 whenever he was writing that inevitably capitalism would lead to massive inequity, that it was ultimately based on the need to denigrate and dehumanize labor, to render them, in his language, a fleshy cog in a giant machine,
Mhm.
and that it would create tension and conflict between those who owned things and those who made things, that over time would always, the Thomas Piketty guy who writes about capital and just makes the point that return on investment will always be greater than wages. That means the people with money are going to have a lot more. That means there's going to come a point where the economic house of cards falls apart. Now, the Joseph Schumters of the world, they're like, that's creative destruction. Bring it. That's
Yeah.
great. So I think it's Niles Ferguson. He's a historian. He may be at Stanford now. He was at Harvard. He writes about the history of money, and he's like, yeah, there's been 20 or whatever depressions and big recessions in the last several hundred years. And when that happens, half of the
I think it comes down to expectations, right? It is an issue. It is more of an issue of expectations, and that is where the problem lies.
population or whatever is catastrophically inconvenienced. But that's the price that we pay for progress. Other people would argue, and I would agree with them, that I will happily sacrifice the rate of progress in order to flatten the curve of economic destruction. To put that in plainer English, I would direct our attention to the social democracies, that, forgetting for the moment of whether it's possible to do this on a scale in a country as big as ours, on all of the things that really matter, gross domestic GDP or whatever, that's just an abstraction. But when you look at whatever the United Nations says, how we measure quality of life, life expectancy, education, rates of alcoholism, suicide, and so on, the countries that do better are the mixed economies. They're market economies that have high tax rates in exchange for the provision of services that come as a right for citizens.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess the question is, you've kind of mentioned that, like as Marx described, capitalism with a slippery slope. Eventually, things go awry in some kind of way. So that's the question: is when you implement a system,
Yeah,
how does it go wrong eventually? Eventually we'll all be dead.
that's exactly right.
So
No. So
So this is so his position is against pure capitalism. So capitalism tends to let the market be free and let the people obtain income through trading, through commerce, right? And then we should just let them be and not tax them. And if the government still is a necessity, but governments should be capitalist as well. If I'm not mistaken, that is the position of capitalism. So if you want like the army and the police, it should be run like private institutions for the sake of profit, that kind of thing. And his objection is that countries that do well on social issues tend to implement not pure capitalism. Tax is against high tax is against capitalism. So a combination of capitalism, free market capitalism, and high tax tends to do better in social issues compared to countries who are more like a free more in support of free market capitalism.
So
Look, that's right.
So, and then the criticism. I mean, I think these days, unfortunately, Marxism is a dirty word. I say unfortunately because even if you disagree with a philosophy,
Yeah.
you should like calling somebody a Marxist
Yeah.
should not be a thing that shuts down all conversation.
No, that's right. And the fact is I'm sympathetic with Jordan's dismissal of the folks in the talking heads these days who spew Marxist words. Um, to me, it's like fashionable nonsense. Do you know that book that the physicist wrote, mocking? You're too young. So in the 20 or so years ago,
We're all pretty young, relative
yeah,
to,
that's right. But I think there were
age
these
of the earth.
NYU physicists. They wrote a paper just mocking the kind of literary postmodern types, and
Oh
it
yeah.
was
Those kinds of
yeah, and it was just nonsense. And of course, it was made the lead article. And you know, my point is Marx wouldn't be a Marxist.
True. I have read and listened to some of the work of Richard Wolff. He speaks pretty eloquently about Marxism.
I like him. Yes.
He's one of the only, one of the only people speaking about a lot about Marxism in the way we are now, in a serious way, in a sort of saying, what are the flaws of capitalism? Not saying like. Yeah, basically sounding very different. And people should check out his work.
No,
because all this kind of work, this kind of outrage, mob culture of sort of demanding equality of outcome. That's not Marxism.
It is not Marxism. But he didn't.
Right. So I didn't know about this. I thought Marxism is all about equality of outcome. So when they said this, I need to correct myself.
Say that. You know, he literally said each, what was it, like each according to their needs and each according to their abilities or something like that.
So the question is the implementation. Like,
Absolutely.
humans are messy. So how does it go wrong? Like,
it is there you go, Lex.
It's messy.
Brilliant. It's messy. And this gets back to my rant about the book that I want to try if I don't stroke out, why left and right are both beside the point.
Yeah.
You know, the people, conservatives are right when they condemn liberals for being simple-minded by assuming that a modification of external conditions will yield changes in human nature. Mm-hmm. You know, again, that's where Marx and Skinner are odd bedfellows. You know, here they are just saying, "Oh, let's change the surroundings, and things will inevitably get better." On the other hand, when conservatives say that people are innately selfish, and they use that as the justification for glorifying the unbridled pursuit of wealth, well, they're only half right, because it turns out that we can be innately selfish, but we are also innately generous and reciprocating creatures.
That is a very good point.
There's remarkable studies, I think they've been done at Yale, of, babies, 14-month-old babies. If someone hands them a toy and then wants something in return, babies, before they can walk and talk, will reciprocate. All right, fine. If they want a toy, let's say, or a bottle of water, baby wants a bottle of water, and I look like I'm trying to give it to the baby, but I drop the bottle, so the baby doesn't get what she or he wanted. When given a chance to reciprocate, little babies will reciprocate because they're aware of and are responding to intention. Similarly, if they see somebody behaving unfairly to someone, they will not help that person in return. So my point is, yeah, we are selfish creatures at times, but we are also simultaneously uber social creatures who are eager to reciprocate. And in fact, we're congenitally prepared to be reciprocators to the point where we will reciprocate.
So I watched a bit of the start of this conversation, and they brought up the question that when the early Greek philosopher, I forgot whether it's Plato or Aristotle, said a talk about soul. So um, a grasshopper soul is to hop. An axe soul is to slash, right? What is a human's soul? So in this explanation, we see that little babies, they tend to have this sense of reciprocity uh, innately built into them, and they have this sense of reluctance to reward people who are not who are being unjust. So we as human beings have justice, right? We so basically maybe he's saying that our soul is to just.
Reciprocate on the basis of intentions above and beyond what actually happens.
How close? So, I mean, your work is on the fundamental role of the fear of mortality in ourselves. How fundamental is this reciprocation, this human connection to other humans?
Oh, I think it's really innate. Yeah, I think it's because bats reciprocate. Not by intention, but this. I'm going here from Richard Dawkins, The Selfish Gene. I love the early Dawkins. I'm less enamored with
like the early Beatles.
Yeah, no. And again, I say this with great respect, but Dawkins just points out that reciprocation is just fundamental. Cooperation is fundamental. It is it's a one-sided view of evolutionary takes on things when we see it solely in terms of individual competition. And
it's almost from a game theoretic perspective too. It's just easier to see the world that way.
Yes,
it's easier to, I don't know. I mean, you see this in physics. There's a whole field of folks like complexity. That kind of embrace the fact that it's all an intricately connected mess, and it's just very difficult to do anything with that kind of science. But it seems to be much closer to actually representing what the world is like.
So, like you put it earlier, Lex, it's messy.
A really great clip. Thank you very much, Lex, for making and posting this clip. And that's it, you guys. Is there anything more that I could say? Maybe next time. Watch my other videos and like, subscribe. Thank you very much. Bye.